Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Sheila North, the longtime journalist and former Grand Chief of Manitoba Keewatinowi Okimakanak, has just announced her intentions to run for the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. North, who has also run for the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, is also set to release a memoir in the fall of 2021. Sheila, thanks so much for being with us this week.
Thank you for having me, Dennis.
You recently, as we said, announced your intentions to run as the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. There's a lot of open seats out there right now that I'm sure people were talking to you about. Why did you decide to run for Grand Chief of AMC?
Well, it was quite the last few months for me, and you're right about that, because I've had conversations with chiefs across Canada, but also with Northern Manitobans for different positions, including running as an MP for Northern Manitoba, and then, of course, this Grand Chief's position here at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. And ultimately, I think, back and forth in my thinking and praying and talking with elders who have asked me to stay home and help with what's going on in Manitoba. That was one of the biggest reasons, but also considering my own personal situation with my family, and I have a new grandson. I'm a cookum now. I feel like it's better for me to stay home right now, because all of our families have been through a lot these past year and a bit, and I'd want to stay home, closer to home, to be here for them as well. So those are the main reasons why I decided to run, but also because I feel like I still have a lot to contribute to our First Nations and to stand with strong leaders in Manitoba for the next few years.
This election for AMC Grand Chief has been delayed a year because of the pandemic. It is going to be taking place this summer, though. What do you see as some of the big issues that are facing First Nations in Manitoba right now?
Well, of course, we know all the bread and butter issues. We know that we're among the most impoverished in Canada in terms of, housing rates are very low. We have high illness rates, including diabetes, even TB, and of course, all the basics of living, what it's like to live with poverty and all the social determinants of health. So, of course, all those things need to still be advocated for, and our leaders do a great job trying to get resources they need for their communities, but we need people at the national level to be able to speak on them. And the pandemic has really highlighted the fact that we have tremendous way to go to make sure people get what they need in our community. So, of course, the bread and butter issues. And then, of course, the post-pandemic, what's that going to look like? We want participation in the economy as Indigenous people. And we know that already in Manitoba, we contribute at least $9 billion a year to the Manitoba economy. So how can we do that more and give, opportunity to entrepreneurs from our own community and other businesses to make sure that our Indigenous people are well represented at all levels. And so there's lots of recovery that needs to happen. And in the mental health capacity and in elder care, those are among the biggest things I think that have come out of this pandemic that we know need to be addressed.
As we know, Manitoba is one of the hardest hit places when it comes to COVID-19 as a province as a whole, and especially First Nations. How would you describe this pandemic for First Nations here in Manitoba?
Well, I think both good and bad things happened, of course. The good is that we saw our leadership immediately spring into action and knew what to do and close down their borders and protected their people as much as they could. They got in the resources they need to keep people safe. And sometimes they did it house by house to deliver cleaning products and other safety equipment. So we know our leaders know what to do on the ground when an emergency hits, and they did it. And they kept the numbers very low, almost non-existent in the first two waves. But then when that shield broke with the third wave, it was inevitable that it was going to happen. But I think the situation would be much worse if our leaders hadn't stepped up and did what they did, along with all their incredible staff that they work with. But of course, inevitably, the numbers have gone high. We've seen many deaths. One of my childhood neighbors' homes, the people that I grew up next to, there was 4 people from the same family that passed away. And just how quickly this pandemic has spread into individual homes because of all the disparities that we know of, the lack of access to good, clean water, and also, of course, housing to be able to isolate. And so many good things happened. And then the other great thing that happened was, our chiefs showed leadership by sharing the vaccines, the extra vaccines they had with their neighbors and people they deal with. And then we also saw them incentivizing people to try and encourage them to get the vaccine if they were hesitant. And now we're seeing the premier announcing that they want to do that. We saw Joe Biden in the States do that. So I credit the Manitoba Chiefs for inspiring everyone to do that.
You were the first female Grand Chief of Manitoba Keewatinowi Okimakanak, representing 30 First Nations in northern Manitoba. You held the role for 3 years. What were some of your takeaways from your time in that role?
I loved every second I was there. It was very challenging. And from day one, the first few things that we worked on as a team was getting the authority back of the Northern Authority of the Child Welfare overseeing body, and the province, the previous government took over authority over it. So we worked diligently with a chief and also one of our technicians to get the reins back. Of course, it's not a perfect situation. We want to see more of the reins back into First Nations hands, but we did overturn that decision. But also we cleaned up a lot of the books and the policies that were in place at the time that needed to be tightened up to make sure that there was, the funds and everything that were coming to MKO were spent in the way that we had planned or the way that the budget had worked. And so we did a lot of that. And also the biggest thing I think we fought for was the health transformation, the Keewatinowi Okimakanak that is in existence in northern Manitoba now through MKO, and now it's a separate entity. From day one, we went to look at the 30 years of resolutions at MKO, and the thread among all of them, there's many threads, but one of the big thread was health. Chiefs for many years wanted us to address the health, and we heard from chiefs back then and then currently that we have to take over our affairs to make sure the resources are there for our people, that they're in the place where they need to be, not the way they are. So a health system that is there for us, by us. And so we attempted to do that, and we almost relentlessly, every time I saw Minister Jane Philpott, the former health minister, even at the airport, I was hounding her and saying, let's get this done. We need this done. This is respectful rebuilding relationships. And we did it at the end of my term. The money came, and now we see Kim operating. So I feel like we've done a lot in that short time with the chiefs that I was able to work with, and all the technicians, and of course, for the benefit of northern Manitobans.
We had Dr. Barry Lavallee on the show earlier this year, who heads it up, and it's certainly been a leader throughout this pandemic. We also had Ontario Regional Chief Roseanne Archibald on the show earlier this year, and speaking about her 3 decades in leadership roles as a woman. Was the fact that you were a female ever an issue during your 3 years as Grand Chief of MKO?
No, the funniest conversation I had so far about that was somebody asked me, what's it like to be a woman leader? And I said, well, I can't really compare it to being a man leader because I've never been a man leader. But, I think that one of the things that I heard during my time as Grand Chief as a female is that, the meetings were a lot more, a lot more calm. And I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that was one of the comments I got from actually an elder who says that the discussions and the dialogue was more guided and more direct, but also a lot more calmer. So if that was the case, then that's good. But I can't really say, other than, a couple of times at the beginning, there was comments made about, people patting me on the head and thinking, I mean, not literally, but that's the kind of thing that they were kind of saying, and not chiefs, but other former candidates and that. So I feel like that we have a role as women leaders in all of it, and not to diminish the men's role, of course. We all have a place, and I think to see more women leading is going to be good, because I believe that we have a bigger, wider view when we're thinking about where to lead and how to lead. Whereas, the other way, at least a study that I read, this is what it found, was that women have the ability to be able to look overview and then move forward to an end goal, whereas male leaders usually have one goal in mind and then push and then make headway that way. So different leadership styles work for different situations. So I value all of the roles that we all play.
Sheila, we got much more to discuss here. We just got to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Sheila North. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Sheila North, a longtime journalist, former Grand Chief of MKO, who's recently announced her intentions to run for the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. And Sheila, I caught you on In Focus there recently, and there's often some criticism of these political advocacy organizations. Frequently, it's the AFN criticized for not representing the people and so on. How would you counter that, and what good do you see that they do as as a former Grand Chief yourself of one of these organizations?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with public perception and misconception of what these organizations are about and what they actually do. And also the roles as chiefs is also misguided in some ways. Not by everyone, but in a large, greater public, I think that's the case. And I would say that just to our Indigenous community as well, in our own country, people have misconceptions about who we are and what we do and how we do things. And so that is not helping in any way. I believe that these organizations like AFN and AMC and MKO, they do have a place in our communities, in our lives every day, because they are meant to advocate for, in a larger way, about the larger, broader issues from a region. And I think that we have that ability to make sure that communities are well represented at that level. Sometimes that doesn't always happen, it seems. And, the perception, again, sometimes seems like people are empire building, and I don't see that as productive. But also we have a lot to do to dispel the myths of Indigenous people in general in our own countries, so we can start to rebuild relationships that have been detrimental to our people for many generations. So this is not just a PTO problem. This is a problem against Indigenous people by Canada who decided or learned to disrespect us in such a big way for many generations. And residential schools is part of all of that. The 60s scoop, all the day school stories. So, this is just part of it.
As we mentioned 3 years ago, you ran for National Chief of the AFN. Perry Bellegarde's about to wrap up his 6 years as National Chief. How would you describe the job he's done over the past 6 years?
That's a good question, Dennis. Of course, I think I respect him and anyone else that has put their name up and actually ran to lead organizations. And I wish him well. I wish him the best as he goes forward. But I don't think we always saw what we needed out of him. And whether it's perception or not, we didn't see him really go after the big problems that we were facing. Sure, there was money that was released, and sure, there seemed like there was building of relationships for the Liberal government to release funds, but essentially that's not what we needed. We didn't need to sound like we were begging for money and then thankful that we got it. That is our money. That the money that was, that it seems like the Liberal government has given to First Nations it's owed to us, and then more. But I think what I hear across the country and what I heard when I was campaigning is that we have to reset relationships that gives the reins back to sovereign nations to run our own affairs, not to be governed by federal government. And from birth to death, everything that affects us is essentially ruled by the bureaucrats and the politicians in Ottawa. And we didn't always see the push from the AFN when Perry was there to make sure that our treaties were being upheld. Even though he talked about treaties a lot, I don't know if the implementation and the interpretation of what treaty implementation was always clear or in the right place. So that would be my biggest, I guess, criticism.
That all said, what are you looking for in a new national chief? As there will be a new national chief this summer or maybe this fall, depending on whether the vote's delayed.
I hope that this new national chief will reflect the tone across Canada that, is saying that we need to look at the relationships that we have. If we're really all about or really in the reconciliation era, let's really do that. How do we do that? And we have different needs across each region and even each treaty territory. And I think that we have to have a leader that will reflect the different needs, but also in a concerted way to make sure that the federal government truly really reset that relationship so we're not under their thumb in any way, or that the lands and resources are actually shared the way that the treaties have taught us that they should be, of mutual respect and peaceful coexistence and collaboration. Those should be the goals for any leader of any organization going forward. And I think we have a good opportunity right now with what happened in the pandemic. We saw the disparities and the needs even heightened greater for our people. And we have proven that we are able to lead our own people when we want to and in the crisis. So we should be able to have that almost idea of a third level government to run our own affairs. And maybe third is not the right term, but another level of government where we are running our affairs as Indigenous people in our own country.
There have been calls over the years recently as well. This won't be happening, obviously, with this upcoming AFN election, but to open the vote up to the people, let everyday people decide who should be national chief rather than just the chiefs. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it should be opened up to everyone? Maybe not just AFN, maybe even AMC?
I think that's been a discussion that's been going on for a while, and I believe that it actually, there was a study done that said that it should go that way now. I think it's going to happen eventually, inevitably, at all the levels. And I know and see the value of opening up the vote, but there's also all kinds of logistics that are involved that have to be worked out. And that's not always easy. We can barely get boil water advisories lifted across Canada, and education systems and healthcare systems are already lagging behind the rest of Canada. So to get the vote for everyone, I think is going to happen at some point, and I believe that it's inevitable.
Sheila, as you mentioned, or we mentioned, you also have a book coming out, and we're going to talk about that. We just got to throw to one more quick break here, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Sheila North. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Sheila North, former Grand Chief for Manitoba Keewatinowi Okimakanak, a longtime journalist, former candidate for the AFN National Chief, a longtime advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and soon to become an author. This fall, releasing a memoir called My Privilege, My Responsibility. Sheila, can you tell us a bit about the book?
Yes, it's going to be published by Great Plains Publishing here in Winnipeg. They approached me to write a book, and at first my reaction was, I'm too young still to write a memoir. But they think that I have a lot of good experiences that a lot of people should know about. So I agreed. It's been the biggest writing challenge, of course, that I've ever had to do in my life. And sitting here in my little house writing it has had ups and downs. I've had a few tears already, but it feels like a healing process, and it feels like all those things that I went through have come close again, and I've experienced them, including living in an abusive relationship for many years, and the reasons why I got into advocating for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and now I'm writing more specifically about the leadership roles I've had, and even my work as a journalist. So it's been quite the process, and I'm enjoying it, but I can't say it's been easy.
I hope the pandemic has given you some time at least to work on it. Was there a reason for the memoir?
Yeah, again, it was because, I had the opportunity, and I rarely turn down any good opportunities. I try to make the most of them and maximize them. So, and then also the timing was right. I have some time, and because of this pandemic, a lot of us are stuck at home. So it gives me time to do that. And I feel like a lot more people need to understand how things progressed. And when I tell part of my story is telling a lot of people's stories, especially our women who have come from isolated communities and trying to survive in urban areas and urban settings and trying to succeed or even attempt to just live. Sometimes it's not that easy. It feels like sometimes this world wasn't meant for us. And so when we do get into it, we struggle really hard, and I have to say that was part of my experience, which is why I feel more determined to help our people more than ever. And if I'm needed, then I want to be there. And one of the elders that I talked to when I first ran at MKO told me, don't consider it a privilege that you're being asked to run. This is your responsibility, and that's part of where the title comes from. I do feel a sense of both.
Well, absolutely a success story, and looking forward to reading the book, but you're still writing other chapters here, so we'll see what happens, and maybe there'll be a part 2 down the road.
Maybe I'll write about you in there.
Yeah, nobody's going to want to read about that. But Sheila, we really appreciate you taking the time here to join us on the show, and looking forward to what happens with all these elections this coming summer.
Me too. Thank you. All the best.
That is all the time we have for this week and for this season. This was our 7th season of Face to Face, and like everything else these days, it was different in many ways. We weren't allowed guests in the studio here. It was pretty lonely. We weren't allowed to travel, and yet we welcome more guests than ever before. So thanks to our 33 guests this season, and a huge thanks to our studio crew for navigating the waters during this crazy time. I also want to specifically recognize our editor, Wilfred Moore, the wizard, who pours a lot of time and heart into each one of these episodes each and every week. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great, safe summer. We'll see you back here in the fall.